Imagine for a second that you spend 30 years of your life building something from the dirt up. You plant the seeds, you raise the children, you manage the chaos, and you turn a small patch of Oregon grass into a multi-million-dollar television and agricultural empire. You trade your privacy for a paycheck, you endure public scrutiny, and you build a legacy. Now, imagine the person you built that with, the person who moved on with someone else, turns around and tells you that your 3 decades of sweat equity are worth a pathetic, insulting $500,000. That is the nightmare scenario we are unpacking today. We are looking at what insiders are calling the most ruthless squeeze-out scam in reality TV history. This isn't just about a divorce. This is about a reported corporate maneuver engineered by Matt and Caryn that was designed to leave Amy with pennies on the dollar. Today, we expose the secret structure of Roloff Holdings Inc., the hidden appraisals, and the shocking courtroom twist where a secret family member allegedly brought their entire house of cards crashing down. If you believe that Amy deserved better than a lowball offer and a backroom deal, and if you want to see the truth about this alleged nepotism scam exposed, make sure you hit that like button right now. It sends a message that we are watching and we know the truth. And if you are new here, subscribe and turn on notifications because we are the only channel brave enough to dig through the legal theories and the insider reports that the network doesn't want you to see. Join Team Amy today and let's get justice served. To understand how we got to this explosive courtroom moment, we have to go back to the paperwork. Most fans think the farm negotiation was just a simple conversation around a kitchen table, but new theories coming from legal analysts suggesting there was something far more sinister happening in the dark. The narrative we are tracking involves the creation of a brand new parent corporation, a shadow entity that we will call Roloff Holdings Inc. According to the timeline we have pieced together, this wasn't just about selling a plot of land. This was a corporate restructuring designed with one specific goal, which was to gut the original farm LLC and forcibly extinguish Amy's shares. Here is how the squeeze-out works, and it is terrifyingly legal if you don't have a shark or a lawyer to catch it. The theory is that Matt and Caryn, working in lockstep, allegedly transferred the most valuable assets, the pumpkin patch intellectual property, the filming rights, and the trademarked logos, out of the original company and into this new shell company. By stripping the value out of the original entity, they could technically turn around and tell Amy that the company she owned half of was now effectively worthless. It is a move corporate raiders use on Wall Street, not something you expect to see on a family farm in Oregon. The audacity of the move is breathtaking. Reports suggest that while Amy was busy focusing on her new life and trying to keep the peace for the sake of the grandkids, the other side was busy calculating exactly how little they could get away with paying her. They presented her with a buyout offer of $500,000 for her foundational stake. Let's do the math on that. The property alone, just the dirt, is prime real estate. Add in the brand value of a show that has been running for decades, the agritourism revenue, and the custom-built structures. $500,000 isn't an offer. It is an eviction notice. It is a number specifically chosen to be so low that it forces a legal battle, a battle they assumed Amy wouldn't have the stomach or the cash flow to fight. But the plan relied on one crucial element remaining secret. They needed Amy to believe that the farm was failing, that the debt was high, and that $500,000 was actually a generous life raft to get her out before the ship sank. It was gaslighting on a corporate scale. We are hearing about secret meetings that took place without Amy's knowledge, where the future of the land was mapped out. Condos, subdivisions, commercial zoning, projects that would generate millions, but only after Amy was completely removed from the deed. This wasn't about preserving a legacy for the kids. This was about consolidating power and profit into a new partnership, one that didn't include the matriarch who started it all. The betrayal runs deeper when you look at who was allegedly pulling the strings. This wasn't just Matt acting alone. The speculation is that Caryn was the architect of this streamlined valuation. As the farm manager turned partner, she knew the books better than anyone. She knew where the bodies were buried, financial speaking. She knew exactly which expenses to inflate to make the profit margins look slim, and she knew exactly which assets to hide in the new holding company. They were banking on Amy's emotional exhaustion. They thought she would take the check just to be done with the drama. They thought they had committed the perfect corporate theft in broad daylight. However, they made a fatal miscalculation. They assumed Amy was just an emotional ex-wife, not a businesswoman. They forgot that you don't run a chaotic family and a massive production for 30 years without learning how to smell a rat. When that offer hit the table, Amy didn't sign. She stalled. And that stalling period is when the cracks in Matt and Caryn's plan started to show. Because while they were busy setting up their shell companies, they left a paper trail. And that paper trail was about to lead right into a trap that they set for themselves, involving a valuation that was so fraudulent, so manipulated, that it would require a special kind of expert to sign off on it. This brings us to the financial bedrock of the scam. In any buyout, the law requires a valuation. You can't just make up a number. Usually, the bank involved requires independent appraisals, and this is where the story takes a turn into criminal territory, according to the theories we are exploring. The bank reportedly did their job. They sent out independent assessors. We have uncovered information suggesting there were 3 separate professional valuations done on the property during this time. These were legitimate market value assessments based on comparable properties in Hillsborough and the revenue of the business. These 3 hidden appraisals placed the farm's true worth between $10 and $12 million. That is the real number, 10 to 12 million. Remember, they offered her $500,000. That is a discrepancy of over 95%. That is not a difference of opinion. That is attempted grand larceny. So, where did these appraisals go? Why didn't Amy see them? The allegation is that Caryn, utilizing her position as the farm manager who handled all the correspondence, deliberately intercepted and hid these appraisals. She buried them deep in the filing cabinets or perhaps shredded them entirely, ensuring that Amy never laid eyes on the documentation that proved she was a millionaire many times over. But they still needed a piece of paper to show Amy. They couldn't just hand her a napkin with $500,000 written on it. They needed an official-looking document from a certified appraiser that justified their lowball offer. They needed a number that was low enough to make their buyout work, but high enough to look somewhat legal. They couldn't go to a reputable firm because no reputable firm would value a gold mine like Roloff Farms at the price of a starter home. They needed a fixer. They needed someone who would write exactly what they told him to write. This is where the plot thickens into a genuine thriller. Instead of using the bank's people, Caryn commissioned a 4th, highly irregular appraisal. This report came from a small, obscure company called West Coast Valuations. It was a firm that no one in the local real estate market had really heard of. It didn't have a big online presence. It didn't have a long history of high-profile commercial audits, but it produced exactly what Matt and Caryn needed. The report from West Coast Valuations claimed that due to market volatility, depreciating assets, and zoning restrictions, the value of Amy's share was practically negligible, justifying the low offer. It was a masterstroke of manipulation. They presented this 4th sham document to Amy as the only official valuation. They told her the market had tanked. They told her the pumpkins weren't selling like they used to. They used this fabricated data to pressure her, day after day, to sign the release forms. It was a pressure cooker designed to break her spirit. But as we are about to see, the name on the bottom of that appraisal, David Peters, wasn't just a random accountant. And the connection between David Peters and Caryn Chandler was about to become the most explosive secret in the history of the show. We are now deep in the weeds of what legal experts are calling one of the most audacious attempts at fraud in civil court history. You have to understand the position Amy was in. She was holding a document that said her life's work was worthless, signed by an expert she didn't know, while her ex-husband and his new partner were tapping their watches, demanding a signature. Most people would have folded. The emotional toll of a divorce is heavy enough without a corporate siege taking place in the background. But something about that West Coast valuations report didn't sit right. It wasn't just low, it was insulting. It claimed the custom-built wedding barns were depreciating liabilities, and that the pumpkin patch, the very heart of their multi-million-dollar seasonal revenue, was merely agricultural wasteland during the off-season. Amy did the one thing they didn't expect. She stopped listening to their noise, and she hired a shark. Enter Miss Albright, a forensic attorney with a reputation for tearing apart corporate bullies. When Albright looked at the document from West Coast Valuations, she didn't just see a low number, she saw a crime scene. She noticed that the font was slightly off. The comparable properties listed were run-down shacks in different counties. And, most suspiciously, the appraisal fee was paid not by the LLC, but from a personal account linked to Caryn. That was the first thread, and when Miss Albright pulled on it, the entire sweater started to unravel. The legal team launched a quiet investigation into David Peters and West Coast Valuations. They didn't alert Matt or Caryn. They let the trap sit open. What they found was staggering. West Coast Valuations didn't have a commercial office. The address listed on the letterhead led to a rented mailbox inside a shipping store 3 towns over. There were no employees, no website traffic, and no history of licensing for agricultural estates of this magnitude. It was a ghost ship. But David Peters was a real person, and when the private investigators ran a background check on him, the pieces of the puzzle slammed together with the force of a freight train. They found a marriage certificate, not for Amy, not for Matt, but for David Peters. He wasn't a stranger. He wasn't an independent third party. He was family. The investigators discovered that David Peters was married to a woman named Janice. Janice's maiden name? Chandler. David Peters was Caryn's brother-in-law. The man hired to independently value the farm was sitting at Thanksgiving dinner with the very woman trying to buy it. It was a conflict of interest so flagrant, so undeniable, that it crossed the line from unethical to illegal. They had caught them red-handed in a nepotism scam designed to defraud Amy of millions. But Miss Albright didn't reveal this card yet. She kept it hidden in her briefcase, waiting for the perfect moment to inflict maximum damage. The day of the trial arrived, and the atmosphere was electric. The courtroom was packed. Matt and Caryn arrived looking like a power couple, confident, smiling for the cameras, seemingly assured that their high-priced defense team and their fabricated paperwork would hold up. They sat at the defense table, whispering and snickering, looking at Amy with pity. They thought they were there to finalize a business deal. They had no idea they were walking into an ambush. The early proceedings were tense. Matt took the stand first, and he was his usual self, charming, a little arrogant, spinning yarns about how hard it is to manage a farm, and how Amy just didn't understand the modern economics of the business. He played the victim, claiming he was trying to be generous with the $500,000 offer. He testified that the appraisal from West Coast Valuations was the gospel truth, and that the market had simply turned against them. Miss Albright let him talk. She let him dig his hole. She asked him simple questions. Did you trust the appraiser? Was the process transparent? Matt answered yes to everything, locking himself into the lie. Then it was Caryn's turn. This was the main event. She walked to the witness stand with her head held high, projecting the image of the capable, long-suffering manager who was just trying to clean up a messy situation. She swore to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. The courtroom went silent. You could hear a pin drop. Miss Albright stood up, adjusted her glasses, and walked slowly toward the witness stand. She didn't start with the heavy artillery. She started with the soft questions. She asked Caryn about her role on the farm, her responsibilities, and her involvement in the buyout negotiations. Caryn answered smoothly, rehearsed and polished. Miss Chandler, Albright began, her voice calm, almost friendly. You commissioned the appraisal from West Coast Valuations, is that correct? Caryn nodded. Yes, I did. We needed a fresh set of eyes on the property. Albright nodded along. And it is crucial in a transaction of this size that the appraiser be completely independent, correct? No bias, no prior relationship, just the cold, hard numbers? Caryn smiled, a little condescendingly. Absolutely, we wanted to be fair to Amy. We picked a neutral party specifically to avoid any drama. The jury nodded. It sounded reasonable, but Albright was just closing the cage door. So, to be clear, under oath, you are stating that you have no personal relationship with Mr. David Peters, the author of this report. You picked him solely on his professional merits? Caryn didn't hesitate. That is correct. I know him only as the appraiser. That was the moment. The perjury had been committed. The lie was on the record. Miss Albright stopped pacing. She walked back to her table, opened a folder, and pulled out a single certified document. The rustling of the paper echoed in the silent room. She turned back to Caryn, her demeanor shifting from friendly to lethal. Miss Chandler, Albright's voice dropped an octave, becoming hard as steel. I am holding a marriage license from Clark County, dated 14 years ago. It lists a Mr. David Peters as the groom. She paused for effect, holding the paper up for the jury to see. And it lists the bride as Janice Chandler. Is Janice Chandler your sister? The color drained from Caryn's face. It happened in an instant. The confident smirk vanished, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated panic. She stammered, I don't see how that's relevant. It is relevant, Albright thundered, her voice filling the courtroom, because it proves that the independent appraiser who valued this farm at a fraction of its worth is your own brother-in-law. You didn't hire a neutral party, Miss Chandler. You hired a family to help you steal this farm. The courtroom erupted. The gasps were audible. Jurors looked at each other, eyes wide. The judge banged the gavel, demanding order, but the damage was done. Matt, sitting at the defense table, put his head in his hands. He knew it was over. But Albright wasn't finished. She approached the witness stand, closing the distance, cornering Caryn like a prosecutor in a murder trial. You lied to this court, Albright pressed. You lied to Amy Roloff, and you conspired with your brother-in-law to fabricate a valuation that ignored $10 million in assets. Did you really think you would get away with it? Did you think we wouldn't check? Caryn looked for a lifeline. She looked at her lawyer, who was frantically shuffling papers, realizing he had been blindsided by his own client's deceit. She looked at Matt, who refused to make eye contact. She was completely exposed. The facade of the innocent, helpful partner shattered into a million pieces. She tried to speak, but her voice cracked. Tears of frustration and embarrassment welled up. It wasn't like that, she whispered, her voice trembling. We were just trying to see the numbers were a lie, Albright cut her off. You tried to defraud a woman who built this empire while you were still filing paperwork. You brought a fake document into this court and swore on the Bible that it was real. You have committed perjury, Miss Chandler. The climax of the trial was a massacre. The defense lawyer tried to object, shouting about ambush tactics and relevance, but the judge was having none of it. The judge, visibly angry at having his courtroom used for such a blatant scheme, overruled every objection. He leaned over the bench, staring down at Caryn. Miss Chandler, the judge said, his voice low and dangerous, I suggest you consult with your counsel very carefully before you answer another question, because right now you are looking at serious sanctions. Caryn crumbled. She dissolved into tears right there on the stand. It wasn't the tears of a victim, it was the tears of a bully who finally got punched back. The jury watched with a mixture of disgust and disbelief. The narrative Matt and Caryn had spent years building, that Amy was bitter, that Amy was greedy, evaporated in seconds. The truth was out. They were the greedy ones. They were the ones willing to use family connections to cheat the mother of Matt's children. As Caryn was excused from the stand, she had to walk past Amy to get back to her seat. Witnesses say Amy didn't gloat. She didn't smile. She just looked at Caryn with a steady, steely gaze. It was the look of a woman who had been vindicated. The power dynamic in the room had shifted violently. Team Matt was decimated. The insulting math they started with had become the evidence of their own corruption. And now, the only question left was how severe the punishment would be. The house of cards had crashed down, and under the rubble, the true value of the farm and the true character of the people trying to steal it was finally revealed for the world to see. The silence in the courtroom following Miss Albright's cross-examination was heavy enough to crush a tank. The air had been sucked out of the room. Caryn sat frozen at the defense table, her face a mask of shock, while her lawyer frantically whispered into her ear, likely explaining that perjury charges were now a very real possibility on top of the civil fraud claims. Matt, who had spent the entire trial leaning back with an air of arrogant boredom, was now hunched over, his elbows on the knees, staring at the floor. He knew the gamble had failed. They had bet the farm, literally, on the idea that they could outsmart Amy and outspend her legal team, and they had lost. The jury was sent out to deliberate, but according to insiders present that day, they didn't need long. In complex corporate fraud cases, deliberations can take days or even weeks. This jury was back in less than 2 hours. That is a speed that signals only one thing in the legal world: complete and total consensus. There was no debate. There was no holdout juror wondering if maybe the brother-in-law's appraisal was an honest mistake. The evidence was overwhelming. The marriage certificate was the smoking gun that turned a complicated financial dispute into a clear-cut case of conspiracy. When the judge returned to the bench, the atmosphere shifted from tense to terrifying. Sources say the judge didn't just read the verdict, he delivered a sermon. He looked directly at Matt and Caryn, bypassing their expensive attorneys. He reportedly told them that their conduct was reprehensible and an insult to the integrity of the judicial system. He noted that creating a shell company to strip assets from a partner is bad enough, but using a secret family member to fabricate legal documents crosses the line into malicious intent. Then came the numbers. The judge didn't just side with Amy, he obliterated the defense's case. First, the court officially dissolved the hostile merger of Roloff Holdings Inc., declaring the entity a fraudulent instrument created solely to disenfranchise a minority shareholder. This meant the farm's assets were immediately repatriated to the original LLC, restoring Amy's full ownership stake. But the judge wasn't done. He ruled that because Matt and Caryn had acted with actual malice, a legal term meaning they knowingly and intentionally tried to cause harm, they were liable for damages far beyond just the value of the land. The courtroom gasped as the final judgment was read. The judge ordered Matt and Caryn to pay a staggering $4 million in compensatory damages to cover the lost revenue, the devalued shares, and the distress caused to Amy's financial standing. But the real kicker, the moment that made the legal analyst's jaws drop, was the punitive damages. The judge tacked on an additional $1 million in personal punitive damages. This wasn't money that could be paid by the farm's insurance or the LLC's accounts. This was a fine levied against Matt and Caryn personally. They had to write that check from their own private bank accounts. $5 million. That was the price of their greed. They tried to save a few million by cheating Amy, and instead it cost them $5 million plus their own legal fees, which were rumored to be astronomical. The squeeze-out had become a clean-out. The devastating irony is that if they had just offered Amy a fair market price in the beginning, say $3 or $4 million, she likely would have taken it, and they would still be ahead. Instead, their arrogance cost them everything. As the gavel banged down, finalizing the judgment, the reaction from the two camps couldn't have been more different. Amy, who had sat stoically through days of lies and manipulation, simply closed her eyes and exhaled. It wasn't a cheer of victory. It was the relief of a survivor. She hugged Miss Albright, the lawyer who had saved her legacy, and walked out of that courtroom not just as a winner, but as a tycoon who had defended her empire. She has proven that you can be kind, you can be soft-spoken, but you cannot be pushed around. On the other side of the aisle, the scene was chaotic. Reports state that Caryn was inconsolable, reportedly turning on her lawyer and blaming him for not vetting the appraisal strategy better. Matt looked shell-shocked. The reality of writing $1 million personal check was setting in. And let's not forget David Peters, the brother-in-law. While he wasn't a defendant in this specific civil suit, The judge ordered a copy of the trial transcript to be sent to the state licensing board for appraisers. It is highly likely that West Coast Valuations is closed for business forever, and Mr. Peters could be facing his own legal nightmare for signing a fraudulent document. The nepotism didn't just fail, it dragged the entire extended family into the mud. This verdict sends a shockwave through the reality TV world. It pulls back the curtain on what really happens when the cameras stop rolling. We see the produced drama on the screen, but the real drama, the corporate theft, the backstabbing, the secret family alliances, is happening in the fine print of legal contracts. Matt and Caryn thought they were playing a game of chess, but they were playing against a woman who had spent 30 years learning the board. They underestimated Amy Roloff, and they paid a $5 million tuition fee for that lesson. The fallout from this is going to be massive. We are already hearing rumors that the network is scrambling. How do you film a happy family farm season when the patriarch and his girlfriend just tried to legally rob the matriarch? How does Caryn show her face at pumpkin season, knowing that every fan walking through those gates knows what she tried to do? The brand is tarnished. The trust is gone. And Amy holds all the cards now. She has the cash, she has the judgment, and most importantly, she has the moral high ground. So we have to ask the ultimate question. After hearing the evidence, after seeing the paper trail, and after watching the humiliating collapse of their defense in court, whose side are you on? Did Caryn deserve to be humiliated on the stand, or was she just a pawn in Matt's game? Did the judge go too hard with the $5 million fine, or was it the perfect amount of sweet justice for a scam this dirty? I want to hear from you. If you think Amy is the ultimate boss for standing her ground, type Team Amy in the comments below. If you are shocked by the betrayal of the brother-in-law appraiser, let me know your theories on who else might have been involved. And listen, we are going to keep digging. There are more unsealed documents coming out next week regarding the custody of the farm's intellectual property, and you do not want to miss that update. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the dark side of reality TV, please destroy that like button. It helps us get this truth out to more people. Subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you are the first to know when the next bombshell drops. We are the only ones telling you the story the network is trying to bury. Thanks for watching, stay vigilant, and remember, always check the signature on the appraisal. We'll see you in the next one.